Good evening, friends. Namaskar, Vinod.
Very good evening.
And today, Vinodji, we are continuing from our previous episode. We were talking about T S Eliot.
Yeah, we had discussed his manifesto of criticism, that is tradition and individual talent.
But don't worry, friends, if you have not listened, you can always go back and listen, and even you can directly listen to this episode as well.
So tradition and individual talent helps you to understand literature, appreciate literature, even write literature in a proper way.
Yeah.
So that is a part of literary criticism. But today we will move to very important world famous poem by T S Eliot, who was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948.
And the poem is The Wasteland.
Published in 1922, immediately after the World War II, and all the critics unmistakably have found the shadow of agony in this poem because it was written in the times when the world was shattered by the violence, by the depression, by the economic collapse, and so many other sufferings.
Yes, it was a very long poem actually, but Ezra Pound, his mentor, he cut it short. Many passages he deleted.
Now the poem is of 440 lines, and it is divided into 5 parts. Namely, the first part is known as the burial of the dead. Second is the game of chess. Water by death by water.
Fire sermon.
Fire sermon. Third is a fire sermon. Then death by water.
And fifth is last part is
what the thunder said. Now, at the outset, friends, all these names of the 5 parts and many of the lines in this poem, they are allusions, references.
What is allusion, Vinodji?
It is referring to some earlier cultural or literary or historical or philosophical line, source, quotation, etc.
Which gives its meaning in the present context. It deepens the meaning actually.
Yeah,
when you use an allusion,
yes,
it deepens your meaning. It's a reference to any past literary work or any event, historical event, or a person, anything, isn't it?
T S Eliot simply does not quote the earlier sources, but he imparts altogether new significance, new meaning to these allusions in this poem. And it is precisely because of this reason the poem is very complex, very difficult to understand,
Simply
to
say
interpret.
a normal lay reader, when he or she will read the poem, he will put it aside.
Yeah, it will be difficult for him even to understand the basic theme.
Yeah.
Forget about the details of the poem.
And I am not saying it just E.M. Foster, Vinodji.
Yes.
He simply said, Mr. Eliot do not want to let us in.
And critics were were so taken aback, or they were put off by the so-called intelligence of T S Eliot. They predicted that the wasteland would die of its natural death.
And the parodies were written, the West paper, one parody was written in the same year.
They thought that nobody will understand the poem and simply people will forget all about it.
Yeah.
But Killian Brooks, American critic, right, he wrote a long commentary explaining the significance and value of this poem, and in course of time we know that it has acquired the status of the epic of 20th century.
And our endeavor also is to make it intelligible to a lay reader so that they can enjoy this.
If I am permitted, I would like to sum up the theme in a few sentences. The central theme, of course there are periphery themes as well in the great masterpiece, but the central theme is perversion, degradation, and commercialization of love or sex relationship in the contemporary Europe. T S Eliot points out that the man-woman relationship, sex relationship, is divorced from its primary function, according to him, which is procreation. People indulge in sex just for excitement or pleasure. And he calls it perversion of sex.
Can we say
degradation of
that
sex.
it's a trifurcation has been delinked, like love, sex, and procreation? These are a trinity, maybe, and they have been delinked from one another in the modern times. Can we say so?
Yes. Basically, why it has been delinked, there are reasons for that, even good reasons for that.
Yeah, there are.
But traditionally, as there were no contraceptives, that
And
people had to be
even
very
there is
cautious.
no good reason why they should be interlinked in the first place.
Yeah,
That's a whole new discussion.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but we'll not
Go into that. Yeah.
We'll stick to the theme of the poem. So as you understand, the theme is the criticism of this commercialization, perversion and degradation of the sex life in the present time. He says it is the commitment of sin, right? He refers it as a commitment of sin, and commitment brings suffering.
And he, of course, doesn't hint at it directly, Vinod.
No, he does not hint at directly. For the sake of understanding, we are telling you that all the allusions, references, and the characters which appear and reappear in his poem, they persistently point out to this hidden theme, right?
Like the title itself, the Westland, has been taken from the myth of the Fisher King,
Right.
who had received injury in his private parts. Actually, it is written as thighs and like groin,
Yes.
but it was understood that it is injury which prevents him from procreating. And then the entire land was converted into wasteland, barren land, and then some knight of the authors, they went and they asked him, what ails you? That was the question to be asked, and finally the Fisher King was regenerated.
The central metaphor comes from Bible or from the religious text. It is commitment of sin, suffering and regeneration.
Yeah.
So that is how all his arguments proceed. They try to point out to some sin, commitment of sin. Then there is a description of suffering, and then there is a regeneration.
Some
Now,
examples would suffice.
definitely.
From the poem. One Murray in the first, very
before
first part,
that,
yeah.
the technique that T S Eliot uses is the technique of compare and contrast. He compares the present with the past and comes back to the present. He says both in the past as well as in the present, the commitments of sin is common. Perversion of sex is not something new in the contemporary times. It has already been there historically. Right? In all the times, people have violated the sanctity of relationship. So commitment is the first, and this commitment of sin is first, comes first, and then it is followed by suffering. But where is the difference? He says in the past, suffering would lead to the regeneration.
Whereas in the present,
it does not lead to the regeneration, but suffering is endless. That is the difference. That is the difference, and that is how the modern man is incapable of acquiring regeneration. That is the prime argument that runs through this poem.
Vinod, you have very beautifully and succinctly summarized the argument. Earlier, suffering led to the regeneration.
Yes.
At present, suffering results from the commission of sin.
Yes.
But it doesn't lead to the regeneration because that understanding, that depth is lacking.
And that is exactly what he is persistently lamenting by quoting various examples in the poem. For example, in the first part, right? The example of German Princess Marie,
who goes to the mountains.
And she remembers from her young days only one incident when she would go into the south mountains in the company of his cousin, right? And she would cry excitedly that hold me tight, because she remembered that she had a sex with this cousin, and she does not remember anything else. So she emerges as the symbol of rootlessness. She is cut off from the past. She is spiritually barren. And even before that, why he calls the present generation or the present Europe as the wasteland? Because modern people, contemporary people, suffer from spiritual and emotional barrenness. And the Rajeshji, the opening line of the poem.
April is the cruelest month. This is April running, Vinodji.
Today is the 24th April.
So April is the cruelest month.
How it is the cruelest? Could you please shed some light on that?
For it mixes memory with desire.
Could you please explain for our listeners?
I mean, these are very intriguing lines. What does happen when memory and desire are intermixed? What is the desire for? What is the memory of? Well, the memory is of the past. Memory is of the pleasure. Memory is even of the commission of the sin. And desire is for regeneration. Desire is for happiness. But problem is that the April fails to deliver on the promise of the regeneration.
Let me explain for the listeners. The April is the season of spring. In Great Britain, right? It's a time of merrymaking. It is a time to go on journey. It's a time to enjoy life, right? But the modern people are so lethargic, they are so lazy that they are not ready to make any efforts, because regeneration, salvation requires some efforts. So they are not ready to take efforts, and that's why
Modern people are consumed by the emptiness.
right, and therefore April appears to be the cruelest month, because it calls upon them to
Act.
set in action.
But they don't.
They hate action. So
What shall we do? What shall we ever do?
Yeah, and another example where he says, T S Eliot repeatedly points out that the illicit relationship always results in suffering. Right? There is an example of Hyacinth girl.
Hyacinth girl,
She repents. She is full of sorrow. She remembers her lover who has deserted her. Just a year ago, out of love, he called her Hyacinth girl,
Yeah.
but he's no longer to be seen. So
this transitory nature of commitment,
yes.
that is a problem. That is a sin according to Eliot, or it results in suffering.
Right, and then a very important and very haunting image comes towards the end of this first part. Unreal city. He says it's
Yeah.
London, Vienna, Paris, any city, unreal city. Now, to understand unreal city, he says that the crowd which goes up and down on the streets in these big cities, right? These people are not alive. They are not spiritually alive. Their senses, their sensibility, it is deadened. These are the people with the deadened sensibility. And he says, I had not thought death had undone so many. He says at the time of the 9, when the Jesus was crucified, people are not aware of the significance of crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They are in the hustle and bustle to go to the office, and in the morning and in the evening they come back as if they are just mechanical people, right? They are not alive at all.
They're not at all alive. And when they come back from, then typist example comes to mind. When typist comes back from the office and
Yes.
her lover, so-called lover, comes and he simply grabs her, finding no resistance, he has sex with her and leaves.
Exactly.
And all her surroundings are not at all erotically appealing. Her socks are lying, hanging, but he just wants her body and has it.
It is an example from middle class.
Yeah.
What T S Eliot tells us that this perversion and commercialization of the sex relationship is common across the classes. In the middle class, this example of a clerk and the typist is there, and then it quotes the example from the lower class,
Yeah.
3 Thames daughters.
Yes.
They come from very, very ordinary families, lower classes basically, and they have been undone, right? They have been ruined by their lovers. One was ruined in the picnic, at the picnic spot, like Moorgate and Richmond.
In the boat.
And they say these Thames daughters, they sing a song that they say that our life is insignificant. It is as insignificant as that of a broken nail. We expect nothing. Nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
That means the life of the common people has been reduced to nothingness. Their expectations, their passions come to nothingness ultimately.
Even the sex has been reduced just to a mechanical action, devoid of any larger significance or devoid of even love. Because sex is said to be the only gateway available to common persons to the higher world, so-called higher world, or upper world or spiritual world.
Then he takes us to the high class, where the high class lady, she is talking to her lover, and she expects that her lover should communicate with her. She repeatedly tells her, tell me something, speak to me. Why don't you speak to me?
Yes.
Is there not anything in your head? She's so persistent, so compelling, that finally he speaks out a Shakespearean line. Those were the pearls that were his eyes. A famous line from Tempest. But lady is incapable of understanding the literary value of that line. She gets annoyed. Is there nothing else in your head? She believes that it is a meaningless rhyme. So,
And
T.S.
this failure of communication is always in T.S. Eliot's poetry. Earlier poems also, they had this failure of communication between the genders. It is as if the men only think and can't speak, and women only speak, can't think.
So this gap in the communication, especially between man and woman relationship, Rajesh, I believe that it is further deepened in the contemporary times. All the psychologists repeatedly point out that we need to build a meaningful, valuable communication, because it is the communication that imparts strength, to any relationship, especially that of man and woman relationship. So T S Eliot is pointing out that in when there is no meaningful relationship, even the meaningful communication cannot take place, and this is a challenge for the contemporary times.
Yes.
And that is why this land is the wasteland, because people fail miserably to communicate to one another. If they are not able to communicate properly, what kind of relationship they can expect for themselves?
And Vinodji, this wasteland, is it simply W-A-S-T-E, wasteland, or is it a pun, westland, W-E-S-T?
No, it is a W-A-S-T-E.
Yeah, it is,
Westland.
but is it intended like a pun?
It can be interpreted.
Or can we say that West is vested, but East is still superior in all these values, and we pride ourselves on all
it
these
is
factors?
altogether different discussion because the Oriental cultures,
Yeah.
right, they have a different take
Yeah.
on man-woman relationship, because we believe in something which is permanent. Especially the Oriental cultures have never approved casual relationship. That much I can say. But the things are fast changing,
Yeah.
even in the Oriental cultures. Then the third part, let us touch upon the third part as well, the fire sermon.
Fire
Which,
sermon.
it is taken from the Buddhist sermon,
yeah.
and Saint Augustine's sermon.
Yes.
This is the fire of the lust. Fire of lust is burning both in the east and both as well as in the west.
West.
All the people suffer from the lust, and the lust basically consumes spirituality, emotion, and everything else. People have simply reduced love into the lust. That is the trouble that T S Eliot is repeatedly pointing out. He gives the example of the the sons of the city directors, right? They go on the picnic, right?
Yeah.
And they have just one night stay with their girlfriends, and even without exchanging the addresses, without knowing each other's name, just they indulge in the sex and they go away. And very famous line comes, the nymphs have departed.
Names are departed, yeah.
Then T S Eliot has provided a unifying force. Otherwise, all these quotations, all these examples seem to be unrelated. Simply people get lost in this crowd of allusions and the references and the examples, that it becomes very difficult to make out any sense, any meaning. So he brings in a unifying factor, that is the character of Tiresias. He's a mythical character, and he is bisexual, both man and woman, and he is immortal. Therefore, it emerges as a symbol of universal experience.
And he's blind as well at a certain stage in his life.
There are many mythological stories why he has gone blind and why he is a bisexual. But readers can read on their own accord all these complexities. But this presence of Tiresias,
Maybe that he wants to say T S Eliot has brought in Tiresias because he's all-knowing.
he's all-knowing.
All-knowing.
Because he can feel and think like a woman, like a man, and he was there in the past, he was there in the medieval times, and he will continue to be there even in the times to come. So he becomes a symbol of universal experience, and he is both a participant as well as an observer of what happens in this poem.
So we can compare it to Ashwatthama in Indian mythology, except for the gender part. Ashwatthama doesn't know what it is like to be a woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then coming to the last part, that is what
before that
the thunder said.
For water, death by water also. It hints at the possibility of regeneration. Water is the symbol of regeneration.
Yes.
And then the last and the final part gives some hope at least.
And before that, there are many hints where T S Eliot is pointing out that there is refuge, and that refuge for the contemporary man is under the red rock, that is church, that is Christianity. He points out that if we want to save ourselves from this suffering, let us embrace religion, right?
And religion also Christianity. Because personally also T S Eliot had studied almost all the religions of the world, including Buddhism, and even in the last part of the Westland he quotes Sanskrit verses also. But finally he got converted himself also in 1927 to Catholicism.
There is almost wordly description of the biblical Westland in T S Eliot. So there are references to various Westland of King Oedipus, wasteland of King Fisher, and the wasteland of the Bible, and finally contemporary European wasteland.
Yeah.
And what the thunder said, this is very interesting. This also gives us an evidence of the vast learning of Mr. T S Eliot.
For 2 years he had even studied Sanskrit and all these Indian texts also. He had tried to study.
So the final message of the poem comes from the Indian wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So there is a story of Lord Prajapatya. There was a great famine in India and the rains were not there for years together. So the devotees gathered on the banks of the river Ganges and they made prayer to Lord Prajapatya. And finally the Lord Prajapatya responded to the prayers of the people, and there was thundering sound in the sky. That was the symbolic of coming of rain. So the clouds thundered thrice, da, da, da.
This is taken to mean Data, Damyata and Dayadvam.
So this is the three things.
Data is to give.
Yeah.
Then
Damyata. No, the Dayadvam is to sympathize.
To sympathize, and Damyata is self-control.
He says these are the three ways, if adopted by the contemporary people, they can attain salvation. They can attain regeneration. So throughout the poem, T S Eliot has been arguing that for the contemporary people, salvation is not there, regeneration is not there. But the poem ends on the optimistic note. He says there is one possibility. Each one of us has to work out his or her own generation. We have to set our
At least
own
let
house
us set my own lands in order. That's what
Exactly.
he says.
He says, Data, give yourself to some great cause, the cause which is larger than life.
A moment's surrender which the ages of prudence cannot retract.
So here he wants that we must break the chains of our self-centeredness, and devote ourselves to some greater cause. It can be spirituality, it can be social work, it can be artistic cause, it can be patriotism, it can be humanity, it can be science, anything.
But it has to be commitment.
Commitment, a lifetime
Like,
commitment.
If you relate it to the earlier parts, sex has generated just into a solitary transaction.
Yes.
So there also you want to sex should result in love at least.
Exactly.
It should be accompanied by love.
Exactly. Then he says, sympathize with the suffering. This is really important.
Definitely.
Because all of us, we are the part of humanity. If once we start sympathizing with those who are less fortunate, only then the real generation will come about.
Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, as it is said.
As Mahatma Gandhi has pointed out, that Sarvodaya is the ultimate answer to all the problems of humanity, because we have to swim and sink together. Nobody can think that he will go across and others may not go there. That's not possible. And in modern
तभी
time,
समर्थ भाव है कि तारता हुआ तरे. That is the test of competence when you swim and let others, help others also swim.
exactly,
Isn't it?
And Damyata, that is the self-control.
And yeah, before this, if you relate it to the earlier parts, Vinodji, sex
Yes.
and love,
Yes.
this also results in sympathize. If you have sex with a girl and you just leave her, because all feminine examples almost Eliot has given,
Yes.
and I can relate it to the present predicament of single mothers in Europe and US and all the Western world.
Yeah.
Why it has happened so? Because simply they have sex, they leave each other, and the girl gets pregnant. Either she puts it for adoption, puts the baby for adoption, all raises on her own. So this, if you can't sympathize even, it's not the question of even sympathy, it's the question of commitment. It's a question of if you have fathered the child and you just leave the mother and the child to float on the wind, that is too much.
It is a question of shared responsibility.
Shared responsibility.
Because coming together physically is not a casual
Yeah.
affair. It cements the two people together, where they have to face joys and sorrow together.
Yeah.
They have to undertake shared responsibility of their life as well as of the children.
And
That
if a human being results out of your combination, then you can't simply run away from this. And the biology ties the girl to the child. She can't run away.
So T S Eliot is basically criticizing this culture of indulging in the physical relationship just for the sake of pleasure and without commitment. And on
And of
this
course, it
account,
applies to all other fields as well, as we have been saying.
Exactly. So Damyata, the
Self-control.
self-control, that's really necessary. It is true that one should enjoy the life, right, with all the five senses, but it does not mean indulgence. Indulgence has to be avoided. And then if he says that if we follow these three things, that is Data, Dayadvam, Damyata,
Damyata.
only then there will be Shanti
Shanti.
in life. That is ultimate tranquility. That is peace. So this wisdom, the final wisdom that is mentioned in the poem, it comes from Indian philosophy. So this is really great that T S Eliot has realized that the West gives rise to the problem and East gives solution. So we are really proud being Indians.
Yes.
We are really proud that the person as great as T S Eliot has recognized that the solution to the problem comes from the Eastern culture, especially that of India. So friends, this T S Eliot's Westland is really complex piece of art and literature. There are so many things, so many allusions, so many references. Each reference requires explanation, understanding, elaboration, and then you will enjoy this poem like anything. I hope, we hope that interest has been generated in your heart to undertake the reading of Westland. Thank you very much. Tell us how you like this episode, how you like this discussion on Westland, and very soon we will be back with some other discussion. Till that time, goodbye.
Goodbye.